Rob, thanks for coming in today into your own office.
Yeah, of course. Good to be downstairs.
Yeah. So, pretty wild background. Founder of Catalant, leading marketplace for basically independent consultants that are experts. So you found folks are from the mid-market, from the up to the Fortune 30 really are using Catalant to solve the problems that their organizations otherwise don't have the in-house capacity to solve or ability to solve. So you have a unique angle, right? You look at like, what is the demand for tasks XYZ? So share with us, how have you seen this shift over the last kind of 12 months and what companies are actually looking for?
For sure. So look, over the time we've run Catalant, we founded it in February 2013.
How old are you? You look great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
With every kind of new enterprise technology, there are a bunch of things you need to do to make that technology actually create business value. So there was, transition from on-prem to cloud and on-prem to SaaS. If I make a mistake, should I just restart?
Okay. Yeah.
So there's the transition from on-prem to SaaS. There was the rise of cloud, the rise of mobile, retailers wanting to be able to offer omni-channel. And what we've seen, I think, over the last 11, 12 years at Catalant is every time there's a new technology, there's the sort of hype cycle of this is so great and so exciting, we're going to buy it. Then there's the, oh gosh, this doesn't really create the business value we thought because it actually needs to talk to 32 other systems internally. And we've actually seen that happen with CRM, with kind of advanced production analytics, with demand forecasting. Obviously our customer base spans kind of every category of the Fortune 100 and Fortune 500. I think what we've seen over the last 12 months is if you're a non-tech Fortune 500 or Russell 2000 CEO, you're asking what does this AI development mean for selling pet food, for mowing lawns, for all of the above, or making lawnmowers. And you know that there's something in your business you should be doing. And if your competitor's doing it and you're not, that's probably bad. But none of your systems talk to each other. And they didn't talk to each other in the pre-AI world. And now things are way worse and the stakes have increased. And so I think we've seen quite a few projects across kind of all customer segments of first, primarily, how do we think about AI as a tool that unlocks business value and maybe increases the organization's speed limit, but then also very specific applications of we want our customer interactions with our chat agent to be fed with that or something like that. And that's where I think if you think of the average Fortune 500 company, certainly airlines or retail or healthcare, they may have 50 or 100 enterprise-wide applications, all of which kind of collaborate to produce the customer and the vendor and the employee experience. Virtually none of those are currently ones that work well together.
And so give us an order of magnitude, what are the AI-related requirements and needs that are coming from the platform in 2024 as a percentage basis versus maybe 2022?
Oh gosh, it must be up 20 or 30x.
20, 30x.
Yeah, I think, look, AI projects prior to GPT-4 were
POCs. Maybe.
POCs or kind of evangelical expeditions where it was kind of like, oh, we should imagine what artificial intelligence or large language models might mean for our business. I think with the release of GPT-4, correctly or incorrectly, it sort of brought it into the short term for everybody.
Yeah.
And so as a result, when you're going to go actually transact with a platform like Catalant, there's I think I may want to purchase external expertise. And then there's I'm actually going to, send a purchase order for a consultant. We've always seen a lot of curiosity about things like this, but it translating into people taking affirmative commercial action is something that's been much more so accelerated in the last 12 months.
Yeah, Sid, you're in this interesting spot where you have both spent your career at NVIDIA and AI, but then also you have, you're an HBS graduate. So that leaves your LinkedIn wide open to these, I would say older HBS graduates that are looking to self-educate on AI. You get quite a few DMs for, I think, folks that are in this awareness phase, maybe before the commercial application saying hey, can we hop on a quick chat and talk about this? You never sort of see this inbound before the opposite direction, but what are you, tell me about these conversations that you're having with folks.
I think there are a varying degree of conversations that people are interested in having. One of the most common ones is, okay, Gen AI is a thing, but is it really?
Yeah.
And how do we get on board this bandwagon? We're probably late to this because we only started now, and there are people who've automated a ton of their workflows and are really saving a ton of money. There are the people who are creating a bunch of value by automating away workflows that were previously mundane, that required a bunch of headcount to be, maintained. And then there's others who want to anticipate kind of where this is all going. Like, given that you're late, what do I do now that gets me in the bandwagon quickly? So we talk about a few options, right? Like, do you want to hire expertise in-house within the company to do this and to build that platform? Or should we be working with an outsourced resource? It could be a startup. It could be expertise you found on Catalant. And that typically is an interesting dynamic because it all comes down to how much time you have and how much time you want to spend to get into the race, right? Is this like a 2 months thing where you want to build something out and see the value come in quickly? Or is this like a year-long or multi-year long process where you build the expertise in-house and actually develop something meaningful that appeals to other tech talent to join you, and then you continue from there?
Yeah, I think most of the time both are true, and that like our recommendations are like you can't really wait 2 quarters to implement something that's going to reduce some of the jobs to be done in the company and automate it away to the obvious AI use cases, because like you're literally leaving shareholder dollars, like you're just evaporating them by not adopting this sooner. And you also, of course, need a long-term strategy. I think the question that a lot of folks are wrestling with in our conversations is like, does it make sense to ever really build if I'm a insurance company, like, do I need like a robust AI engineering team, or like, should I focus on what I'm great at and just outsource like the AI execution implementation and own the strategy? And I think like we've seen that be more appetizing, more appealing from a executive perspective, because they have no inclination that like if you work at a large insurance company, that you're gonna be really great at holding on to like exclusive AI talent. Like it's just like the reality of supply and demand within the talent marketplace. So like we're like, great, like create a strategy and then go find the people that are gonna do it. And it doesn't really matter if they work within your company or not. The fact that they can do it today is probably much more helpful than they can do it long term. So,
and that brings me to an important point that you mentioned, Rob, just now. It was about the CRM revolution, right? There are these bunch of things that you have to make work to actually have that product be successful, right? And with the recent questions that we've been getting, it comes down to the Goldman Sachs report about AI, Gen AI being a bubble and being all hype. It would be interesting to understand your take on that. For one, their point is you have to make work too many systems and the cost is really high to get things working. But for the other, we've already seen startups. I'm pretty sure you've invested in companies that have, including us, that have successfully applied AI to automation and workflows and seen early results. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, look, we've certainly been very active in the category. And I think where we see a lot of short-term business value, situations where humans are doing manual repeatable tasks that are relatively low stakes.
Yeah.
So would I trust Gen AI today to diagnose cancer? No. Would I trust, in the case of a real asymmetric portfolio company, I'm a digital marketer. I want to try hundreds of varieties of the same but slightly different ad, where one has a father and a son and the other has a mother and a daughter. Relatively low stakes situation. Today, the way that happens in marketing is some marketer will basically copy and paste the photo in. They'll write a little, this hammock is great for moms and daughters. And that's the kind of process where being able to replicate it at massive scale with virtually zero cost compared to a human being can actually create tremendous business value. Because if you think of what happens downstream from that ad, the cost of the AI is negligible. Say you're a department store or clothing manufacturer and you're spending, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on online advertising. The ability to rapidly proliferate and test things is very interesting, and you can do that for a couple dollars versus having kind of an army of people that would otherwise be configuring all those ads. And so I like to believe that where Gen AI really matters is when you can spend a relatively small amount of compute cost and influence spend on, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not tens of millions of cost, or you have the potential to generate the same sort of order of magnitude of revenue. That ROI equation to me feels not like a bubble at all.
Like the Goldman report that like Sid's talking about is really looking at a macro level. Like, hey, what is the amount of investment into the category, and like what are the category returns that we're going to have to see for this to make sense? And it's like only relevant to like macro investors, so it's like who cares? Like,
Totally.
like who cares?
Yeah,
Like,
and it's also true. Look, if you're running a mid-market company or a Fortune 500 company, you're not making meta investments in advanced sort of like large language models or AI.
Right.
You're optimizing business processes and subtracting cost or increasing revenue. And so I think where a lot of, for instance, I believe that a lot of venture capital investment in AI is going to produce zero results. As in the gold rush, a lot of people who went out to look for gold ended up losing money. If you're in the right spot or you're a consumer of gold, the gold rush was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it can be misleading. It sometimes feels very smart to talk skeptically about a category.
Yeah.
Because it's very hard for that person to be disproved.
Yeah.
But the reality is, whether you're running a company or you're running an investment firm, we're all in the business of taking something and turning it into something more. Yeah. And it's very hard to deny that sort of artificial intelligence is a key part of doing that.
Yeah, like most people are, as an executive or even like a capital allocator, are looking at one or a couple of companies, right? Like, and it's like what is like the unit economics of AI like on this business? Like that's what I think most people care about. Right. And so like there's all this hype that like AI, and more recently in the last like weeks, like, oh, is this going to pan out? And it's like, this is like, for most people that are operators, it's just the wrong question.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, let me phrase that differently. There is a tremendous amount of work, even still onshore in the domestic US economy, that is manual, repeatable work.
Yep.
One of our most exciting companies is called Evolution IQ. And what they do is transform and assist with a lot of workers' comp and long-term claims adjudication, which before them was done completely manually.
Yep.
And the reality is 90-95% of long-term disability and workers' comp claims are fully AI reviewable because the average one is completely legitimate. And a AI-based model can very quickly figure out which ones are legitimate, pass those through. And why that's particularly interesting for the insurer is that the sooner you get benefits to somebody who's been long-term disabled, quite obviously better for them, but also shrinks the total cost.
Yeah.
Having somebody who's been injured on the job site go without benefits and without care for weeks or months while the human adjusters go through their backlog is actually quite self-destructive.
Yeah.
And that's an area where, a little bit of extra cost actually reduces sort of short-term, intermediate term, and long-term costs very significantly.
Yeah. And like the down the middle use case that we've been building for a bunch of companies is like application ingestion. Like there's like a mass number of companies, whether it's like lenders, anyone in finance, anyone in insurance, some folks in real estate, like their business is run on an inbound sequence of unstructured data. And like they're using massive outsourced teams because this is how this problem has been solved, right? And so it's like, it's interesting in that like even in finance, which is like a highly regulated industry, we're seeing AI actually be more accurate than human input. And so it's like crossing the threshold of like, oh, well, like, is it accurate? This is quite important. It's like humans in data entry are between like 96 to 99% accurate, which is pretty accurate until you're dealing with like tens of thousands of applications a day or a week. And all of a sudden, like you have hundreds of applications that are wrong. And so not only are we seeing the ability to like cut massive cost out of the system that goes right to the bottom line, but like we're actually delivering a higher quality output for the application, which folks I don't think expected from an accuracy perspective, which has been quite interesting. So what are the opportunities or the use cases that you're seeing materialize from companies from your view, either at Asymmetric or at Catalant, that were unsurprising or emerging? Because I think a lot of the qualities with new technology are almost emergent in nature.
So maybe take you through some of them that I think would probably fall on the more obvious sides. One of our most exciting companies does revenue cycle management, medical billing with AI. And the history of revenue cycle management is largely big teams of workers, most of them in lower cost geographies. That process is better than in-sourced revenue cycle management, like having your staff do the billing. It's obviously more expandable and has kind of an AWS quality. It is, as you just called out, strictly worse than automating that. And, one that I think is a little less obvious, one of our most exciting companies translates blueprints for an airplane wing or a car door, how they actually get manufactured on the shop floor, which historically was somebody turning the blueprint into a IKEA style PowerPoint deck, which the person actually would walk around the shop floor. This is how like airplane wings get built. They would walk around the shop floor with their
at
IKEA
Boeing,
instructions.
At Boeing specifically, right? Like this is
Sure.
definitely how they build them.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And they would walk around with the kind of IKEA assembly instructions, but that had been made manually in PowerPoint by the engineer and the designer of the piece. Yeah. What this does is it ingests the diagram of the part and then automatically creates work instructions. And that is something I never would have thought of as an application of AI.
Yeah.
And interestingly, in this case, doesn't remove any of the human labor. It just makes them far more effective and presents them with work instructions. Anybody who's ever assembled IKEA furniture understands that a flat printout is only capable of somewhat, like who among us has not wondered, do I insert the screw first or do I get down on the floor to get underneath that part of the table?
Yeah.
And this basically creates a video automatically instruction for how the piece gets assembled.
Wow.
And that's like a very nuanced, non-obvious use and something that will undoubtedly lead to faster and more accurate manufacturing and, I would imagine way more content employees.
Yeah, and just more reliable airplanes, we all hope.
Certainly in the case of that manufacturer.
It seems like you identified some kind of a pattern here, is that we started this conversation with can AI definitely help with detecting cancer today? Probably not. But then we landed on AI has been surprisingly super helpful with translating blueprints into actually useful materials. And it seems like because the technology underlying LLMs, the transformer architecture, the way LLMs learn is by memorizing data. It seems like they're producing something net new, but they're actually very, very good at regurgitating what they've memorized and adapting it to the prompt. And they're literally completing the prompt itself, right? So in that sense, if your workflow is well-defined, if it has identifiable patterns, if it is menial and repetitive, and you're able to frame it in a way that an LLM would understand, it seems like you may have a win on your hands from a candidate for automation. Was that something you would say?
For sure. Look, I think for a lot of these use cases, LLMs are an interim step on the road to automation. So because, and this is, stay with me because this will be a little reductive. When you think of application input, what's going on there is a human being has to do a bunch of manual work. I am trying to get a car loan or a mortgage. There's a bunch of facts that are actually known to data systems that I control. Some of them I have memorized, like my social security number. Some of them, like, what apartment I lived in 15 years ago, I don't have memorized. But they're all things that exist in an online system somewhere. There's probably a bunch of different systems. I have bank accounts, and I have my physical birth certificate that has all this information. And basically that information needs to get with complete fidelity into a mortgage verification, employment verification system. And so currently that workflow is things come out of my head or I copy things down off the screen, probably not in written format, perhaps in DocuSign, perhaps I'm filling them out in an editable text field on a website. Probably in some cases you are actually filling out, forms by hand.
We see that.
I've had to do that.
Yeah.
Certainly it's how it happens when you go to a doctor's office and you're filling in the intake paperwork. And then on the opposite side, previously, and in a lot of the world still, a human is reviewing the things on a sheet of paper or perhaps without OCR assist, is inputting that data and it's putting it into another database. So what's actually happened there is numbers have left the database or a piece of paper in my head and they've entered another database, and then some math is done on them and makes a judgment about whether I can get this car loan or whether I'm approved for a mortgage of this size. That whole process is actually tremendously inefficient, and that process goes back to kind of the beginning of people using data to make decisions on stuff, and that's probably mid-1800s, early 1900s. Sort of lending is something where you have to provide data so that people can make decisions. And basically the whole application industry was something that keyed into the beginning of databases and people using math to make decisions, because in fact, prior to that, the way that banks made loans was they kind of knew you and they looked at you and there was no documentation. It was just sort of like, I know what that farm is worth, so I'm going to extend you credit to buy supplies.
Tough way to generate alpha, or a great way, depending on.
So it should be the case, right? Today, it should already be the case that these systems all talk to each other, and I get a binary red-green prompt on my phone that says, JP Morgan wants to see if you are a qualified, lessor of this. JP Morgan wants to know if you're somebody who's qualified to afford this car. Click green, and the system will send the right data. JP Morgan will let you know, and then in theory, pretty close to instantaneously, it should say yes. And that's how the process should work. It doesn't work that way today, I think, because the systems all don't talk to each other, and particularly as regards PII and HIPAA compliant information, there are a lot of guardrails and walls up between organizations for data exchange.
Yeah.
And if you think of how much more efficient, like how much more quickly could you move into a house or get a home or get a prescription filled if all the systems just talk to each other? And I'm not adding, I as the human in between, I'm just slowing that process down and introducing both I and the person who's inputting the data on the other side are just creating possible errors and slowing the process down and adding cost.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think we'll ever live in that world, with the realistic constraints of people being hyper scarce with their information. I don't even know if I want to live in that world, even if it's a little bit easier.
I don't know. Having just been through leasing a car and moving into an apartment, I would very much like to live in that world.
You're all in. You're all in on on a globally connected.
But here's a real example. So my family and I are transitioning from one bank to another, and you might think you send a bunch of paperwork. It's actually a tremendously complicated process. And it's now taken us the better part of 2 months because we needed my grandmother's death certificate and we needed access to this IRA that I haven't seen in 14 years since I left my employer 14 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing where there should be a digital file of everything about me, and it should be able to talk to the other digital files it needs to, and that should be, a couple clicks.
Yeah. That was really supposed to be the promise of blockchain, right?
If there was a company that did that, though.
Yeah.
Like if there was a bank whose value prop was, you want to join us, you can press the green button on your phone and you're in.
Right.
I think people would be more likely to partner with them.
Yeah.
And I think you see that like in the case of like Venmo.
Right.
If you think of how complicated your relationship is with your bank versus Venmo, there's only like 6 or 8 things you can do on the Venmo app. You can basically send money to other people. You can request money from other people. You can input money from your bank account. And you can send money to your bank account. And that's like, at the end of the day, that's also all a bank does.
Yeah.
But there's 42 levels of extra that are come out of the regulatory regime, or a lot of extra functions that don't really add business value to the customer.
Yeah. So curious your perspective, we're translating towards that world, whether it's going to be Rob's world of a super connected database, or middleware layers that solve these problems with OCR, AI vision, all of this problem. We're trending towards a world of a smoother operating system for everybody.
Yep.
And that's going to drastically change ultimately a company's P&L, because the dollars required to execute the same activities are going to change pretty dramatically. So you've done a lot of thinking about the future of work. You were on front end of when you were building Catalant. What do you think the future of work really looks like? What does a company's P&L look like 5 years from now? And where's the cost added? Where's the cost going down?
Yeah, it's certainly the case that companies are going to have fewer employees down the road. In 2013, when we started Catalant, our view on fewer employees was more contractors and more flexible professionals that showed up, performed a specific task, and departed. In 2013, we couldn't have imagined that actually potentially a large reason why they'd have fewer employees who are full-time was because non-human workers would actually be filling a lot of that gap. So there's been for several thousand years, there's been a conflation of work and job. So they were synonymous until maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And there's always a part of the economy that was contractor-based. But in the main, 95% of employment was very much W-2, sort of mainstream employment. I think as organizations begin to think about jobs to be done instead of just securing and maintaining headcount, it leads to a way more exciting relationship for the existing talent, because their relationship with their employer is less of a prison sort of, we pay you money to come in here every day, sit and wait to hear what you're supposed to do and do it, and then you're allowed to leave at the end of the day, versus here's the total set of tasks we need to take on. Some fraction should go to full-time sort of W-2 employees for sure. Some fraction should go to fractional 1099 contractors. And increasingly, I think a lot of that work should be automated.
Yeah.
And then further, I don't think that will result in the company spending fewer dollars on human capital. I think that what it'll actually lead to is those dollars being larger and deployed more towards higher value activities. Because the reality is, even in Fortune 500 corporates today, a tremendous amount of work that gets done could be automated.
Yeah.
But then they would most likely keep those people or find other people to do new and better things to propel the business forward.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that AI has actually been the forcing function to get to the atomic level of jobs to be done, because
Correct.
it's only so good at doing highly specific tasks, and you can link those agentically as long as everything is highly defined. But for the longest time, we were just throwing job roles at things.
What's important, there's been something called the work breakdown method, which is many decades old. And we actually tried in the mid-teens, 2014, 15, to reduce people's jobs into a series of tasks. And of course, any of us could do it manually. So we have a financial analyst. What do? They take in data, they do a bunch of math, they provide that out to somebody else with some sort of narrative, inference or conclusion about what the data means. You can do that for one job. Jobs are dynamic, and what I just shared was very superficial.
Yeah.
I do feel as if AI is the unlock, that if you basically had a sufficiently powerful mechanism that had access to your whole G Suite, your calendar, and listened to every word you said, it listened for 12 months. I bet at the end it could put guardrails around what you do. What I think in the short term was harder to automate is kind of the raw business judgment around it. But in terms of taking your job and putting it on a skeleton of, every day Rob comes in and he does math to figure out the answer to this question, and then he provides narrative voiceover to some of that math to other group of people that take in that data to do a bunch of things, that AI can be a huge unlock in figuring out what people actually do all day.
Yeah, I think that's probably the wisest way to do it. We find it's quite actually difficult to get people to self-describe all the jobs to be done, because it's not an intuitive way to think about it.
Well, I think one of the other problems with people self-describing what they do is that
they conflate it a lot.
We tend to, humans obviously have a tremendous number of biases in how we think about how we spend our day. We definitely asymptote towards remembering things that are particularly pleasant and particularly unpleasant. When in reality, the average thing we do is kind of neither. So if somebody said, "Tell me about your job as a VC," I'd say, it's all about winning deals and then helping companies figure out what they're going to do when they're going to run out of money. And if you actually looked at my time allocation, I spend about 1% of my time doing those two things, and 99% just sort of on Zooms hearing about business models. But in my sort of heroic self-conception, I don't like to think that I spend the majority of my life on Zooms learning about businesses we're not going to invest in.
But that's reality.
But that is what I do.
And Rob, piggybacking on that, the way you describe it, clearly there's a tremendous opportunity with generative AI going forward, as we're only scratching the surface in terms of what the models can do, how accurate they are, and then cost is also presumably going down from an inference standpoint, at least. What is your advice to entrepreneurs in identifying opportunities? We talked about how complicated it is today to get systems talking to each other. Should entrepreneurs be the ones unlocking those doors, or are there specific nuances in terms of opportunities that they should be looking for?
Yeah, what I'd say is, look, the reality is every business operates in a competitive environment. A good framing for this is, if I had a competitor that was just crushing me, why would that be? What part of their business would they have figured out how to do better? So here's a great example. We invested in a pool cleaning business in San Diego, and the founder had a really good insight, which is that pool cleaning is a business that's done really well with route optimization. So there's 14 houses on a street, and there's 10 streets. So there's 140 houses, and they're on 10 streets. Because of transit time and a lot of other reasons, it is best if you have all 14 houses on one street, and there are there's 10 firms, each with 14 houses on one street. The way pool cleaning businesses tend to work is you have Mrs. Johnson over here and Mr. Williams 3 blocks away. And so there's no real actual logic to what happens. And so what he basically found was that he could go sign up business, and rather than thinking about how much people could pay or how large their pool was, that the primary vector for growing the business should actually be with really elegant route optimization, something that obviously AI can help with tremendously. So if I were running a business operating in competitive context with all of them, I'd say, what's the most annoying part of my business or thing that's holding me back? And if I had a competitor who did that way better, what would they have done to make that way better? Come to that answer, and then go find a large language model that can solve that problem.
It's
and
almost,
I think you'd find in almost every business, there is, like, take my bank example.
Yeah.
You know, there was a serious point during this 2-month process where I was just kind of like, maybe I'm just going to stay. This is pretty unpleasant.
Maybe by design.
If I were a bank trying to rapidly onboard tech-savvy millennial customers, I would find a way to onboard with the easy button and then take that to market.
Yeah. And so flip the question. It feels a little bit easier to answer from the entrepreneur angle, but like there's more friction in these larger companies, right? These enterprises that are trying to adopt AI. So like, what are your advice?
Yeah.
Give me the...
For sure. I think what we've seen, and this is also in my prior experience, as a private equity investor at Goldman and Bain Capital, incrementalism, there's a huge tendency, and you saw this actually in people who won e-commerce, omnichannel. So physical retailers that went to omnichannel. Within a big company, your primary goal as the CEO is not to screw it up. You don't want the stock price to fall. You don't want the dividend to go down. But once or twice in a business generation, so meaning probably like once a decade or once every 2 decades, there's a trend that comes around that's sufficiently large that you kind of have to bet the business on it. And in retail in 2006 or 2010, it was actually e-commerce, sort of omnichannel. If you tried to piecemeal your way into omnichannel, it was actually worse than you not being in it at all. So if you had a choice of just operating a website saying, here's where our stores are located, we sell tennis shoes, good luck, we'll see you on La Cienega Boulevard, come find us. That was actually a better experience than somebody that went half into e-commerce. And my definition of half into e-commerce is maybe you had a catalog of products online that weren't buyable, or you had buy but no pickup in store, or you didn't have real-time inventory. And the net of going into it incrementally was that you had people show up at the store and the product wasn't there. Or you had people think they could buy it in store or browse in store and then shop online, and that also didn't work. And that was way less satisfying than somebody just ordering it on your website. For AI, I would argue this is something you really just have to rip the Band-Aid off and do the complete transformation of your business, even if the next quarter or 2 or 4 is more painful, because 5 years from now, you'll be really grateful. Whereas the half in, half measure method, I think actually doesn't only waste money, it's actually worse than doing nothing.
And so I think you have consensus with your opinion at the board of directors level. I think you have consensus with your opinion at the CEO level. And I think we're at this moment in time where it's like, hey, I'm an executive in one of these verticals, or I'm an SVP, and I have to be like, all right, I'm getting a directive to like spend dollars for AI. Like, how do I even figure out how to do that?
Yeah, look, I think CEOs could do a better job of giving their direct reports and their direct reports grace on things being a little messy for a quarter or 2 or 4. I would also say that it is very clear anybody who runs a business knows what the bottleneck is in that business, whether it's customers or supply or manufacturing capacity. So using sort of large language models to go attack the bottleneck of the business is the only thing that matters. There's this great roll-up founder or entrepreneur named Brad Jacobs who has a theory of M&A, which is you should only do big and complicated deals because the big simple deals end up overpriced and the small deals don't move the needle. But where you can create a lot of value is by big messy stuff. And I'd argue that AI is a big messy thing. And every business, if you think of the Fortune 500, probably 475 of those businesses have a key problem right now. Some of them are existential, some of them are just annoying. But I would say take the boldest possible action you can to go solve your biggest problem and do it with large language models, and fully recognize that there's going to be, 1, 2, 4 quarters of pain en route to achieving that outcome.
Brad Jacobs is my crush entrepreneur. So if you're out there, Brad, and you see this, I love you. He's the man. I'm thinking about one day moving to Greenwich just for the chance to meet him.
I bet if you hung out in Greenwich long enough, you could find him.
It's not that big of a place.
It's not that big a town.
You're crushing when you know where the guy lives. And so I think what we see for folks that want to invest is like, we're just like, come talk to us, right? We do this all day. All we do is sit down, look at your business processes, and help implement AI to automate it. So like that's like one of the easiest onboards to work with a company like us. Is like, we know you're having this problem. We know this moment in time is happening, and like, let us help you build these AI solutions.
Yeah, and I think what you guys have built fits into this happy sweet spot that there's this misconception, and I think a lot of the disappointment and sort of missed expectations on AI to date is people say, I have a business problem, I'm going to throw it in ChatGPT and see what I get back.
Yeah.
And that's asinine.
Yeah.
Or people say, I'm going to go hire generic blank McKinsey. Sorry. McKinsey is a wonderful partner of Catalant. They go hire a generic big consulting corp.
Yeah.
And they use completely offline manual processes that literally look like the same assignment in 1984 or 1994.
Yeah.
And the actual approach that required is a balance between sort of thoughtful business judgment with human beings using all of the power of the technology.
Yeah. It has to be like relatively consultative upfront. And like what we always say to the businesses is if you can work with us to do the hard work of like, what are the jobs to be done, which will help co-create with you, like we can build beautiful automation and deliver bottom line results. And we're actually able to deliver ROI like in the next quarter for a lot of these use cases. And so that gives confidence to the executive at the top and the board of directors that they're starting to see this incremental investment. So even if you're not patient, which we think folks should be, but even if you're not, when you can deliver ROI sort of that quickly, everyone's able to double down and triple down on what's sort of a generation changing technology. Totally. So that's what we're seeing. Well, Sid, do you have any stumping questions for Rob?
No.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming in, man.
My pleasure. Yeah, of course. Great to see you guys.